Hello and welcome to my channel, and the subject of this video is Boring Machines, an Italian job lot of 10 albums. I've been thinking of making this video for some time now. Originally I'd planned to release it at the end of last year, but with Christmas and that, it just got pushed back in the schedule. Of course, it crossed my mind that this is likely to be another video that's rather niche and therefore unlikely to gain that much traction on YouTube. Even so, if there are artists that I like that receive little or no attention, I'll do my bit to back them and use this platform as a modern form of what used to be referred to as word of mouth. Where exactly does Boring Machines fit in then? It's an Italian independent record label based in Treviso. Its main but not exclusive range of releases have been by artists that fall into the category Italian occult psychedelia, or IOP for short. That's a term I was completely unaware of until I read an article in Shindig magazine several years ago, and I heard a track by the group Heroin in Tahiti on Stuart Maconie's Freak Show on Six Music at around about the same time. To keep it brief, IOP draws upon popular culture, wider cultural influences and history, all from an Italian perspective. It's like an Italian equivalent of what in the UK comes within the sphere of hauntology. Anyway, 8 years ago, I decided to buy the entire Boring Machines digital discography from Bandcamp. 70 plus releases for £35 seemed like a good deal to me. So this video highlights 10 of my favourite albums from that lot, and I'll talk about them in random order with the exception of the last one, which is my favourite. So to kick things off, it's Tebe by La Piramide de Sangue. When I mentioned wider cultural influences, geography is one of the aspects I'm thinking of. In the case of this album by La Piramide de Sangue, or in English, The Pyramid of Blood, you get psychedelic rock infused with sounds from the other side of the Mediterranean, i.e. North Africa and the Middle East. The frequent prominence of clarinet over guitar and the more exotic rhythms than you'd ordinarily hear on psychedelic albums from Northern European or North American artists gives the album a bouncy physicality. Danceable, I'd say, in a lot of places. Getting back to guitars, if you like the use of the wah-wah pedal, then you'll find tracks here to keep you happy. All 7 track titles are in Italian, so you're going to have to forgive any pronunciation catastrophes that I'm about to perform. 3 of my favourites are Io sono la tigre, which translates to I am the tiger, Sandalo and Complotti a Tebe. Respectively, that's Sandal and Conspiracies in Thebes in English. Tebe was the band's debut album and came out in 2012. To the best of my knowledge, they only released one other, Sete, in 2014. Both I like very much, but it's too close a call to say which one I prefer. Next is Mammoothanes by Mammoothanes. This self-titled album from 2010 is actually the second full-length album by Mammoothanes. If I were to describe its sound in a few words, it would be the experimental end of psychedelia meets the experimental end of krautrock. The Velvet Underground meets Amon Dahl too, maybe. I'll expand on that though. There are 7 tracks and differing types of drones get used on nearly all of them. Rhythms range from being close to tribal to washes of brushed cymbals built into loops. Vocals are in places indistinct or whispered. Otabenga is one of the livelier rhythmic tracks where whispering evolves into screams, at times backed by a scratchy keyboard melody. Kasho Kashek is another energetic track where psychedelic guitar and keyboards slowly arrive. The guitar in particular is along the lines of the Velvet Underground, shades of European Sun. A New Start, in contrast, has no drums or percussion, and its single-note drone accompanied by a flute melody brings to mind an artist like Popol Vuh. Ave Maria, the 12-minute-plus closing track, contains choral elements and more whispered vocals, as well as moaning as if in some kind of religious rapture, And then there's the dominant 5-beat floor tom rhythm punctuated by cymbal crashes. An interesting album with a decent amount of strangeness. My third selection is Squadra Omega by Squadra Omega, another self-titled album from 2010, but this one is a debut. The album starts with the 16.5-minute long Murder in the Mountains. If you can imagine Hawkwind circa 1972 minus the heaviness of the lead guitar, then that's not a million miles from where this track goes. A stoner-type tempo with lots of echoing saxophone, a hypnotic bass line and swirling background synths. The middle of the track eases right back with a narrated passage that might well have been lifted from a film. As that finishes, everything apart from the keyboards is stripped away before it all builds back up again. As the album is only 31 minutes long, Murder in the Mountains dominates it. However, the remaining 3 tracks all have their merits. The Mystery of the Deep Blues Sea is short, punchy, up-tempo rock. After that, Hemen Hatan is built around stabs of saxophone that remind me a little of Protection by Cabaret Voltaire from their 2x45 album, albeit everything else is nearer to jazz than it is electronic. Final track, Ometi, mixes the style of the first 2 tracks, starting off stonerish, then shifting to something with more bite. This album is also available on vinyl and CD, and they're unusual because they have one more track than you get with the download version. Most of the time it works the other way round. Love Symposium Alien Spider by 1997 EV was released in 2016, and according to Discogs, it was their last album. Prior to that, since 1999, they had a handful of releases, some on CD only, some vinyl only, and a couple of cassettes. The lack of output since 2016 is unfortunate, really, because if you like a more modern take on psychedelia with slightly oppressive drones, then Love Symposium Alien Spider is a rewarding listen. It's pretty down-tempo, using guitar loops that create an undercurrent of menace and keeps the mind focused in spite of its hypnotic qualities. The vocals emerge from the music's foggy background in understated fashion. High points on this album are Magneto Spleen and Black Christine. The latter has a keyboard motif that reminds me a little bit of School at Night by Goblin from their 1975 album Profondo Rosso. That melody combined with the ponderous, distorted guitar chords gives it a kind of seasick feel. Maybe that sounds like I'm describing something that's terrible to listen to, but it isn't, far from it in fact. Next up, it's Wo ist Bela by Fabio Orsi. Although the title of this album is German, translating to Where is Bela, Fabio Orsi is an Italian electronic artist who has quite an extensive discography. There are 5 tracks, simply named Lope 1 through to Lope 5. Lope 1 is close to 13 minutes long. It's cinematic and gradually builds in intensity. The rhythm stays in the background and threatens to evolve into something more powerfully beat-driven, but doesn't. Instead, the tension is maintained. This method is used throughout much of the album, with the rhythm being carried by short looping melodies creating a trance-like feeling. What makes Wo ist Bela work for me is the subtlety of the layering. Fabio Orsi is clearly in no hurry much of the time, and shifts in how tracks develop almost happen without you noticing. There's just an awareness that things end differently to how they began. Lope 5 is the only exception in that beats are in the foreground, and it's the album at its most energetic. In summary, it's minimally structured ambient music teetering on the edge of dark ambient. Fans of established names from the past like Tangerine Dream, Klaus Schulze or Cluster may well like it. And He Told Us to Turn to the Sun by Father Murphy was released in 2008, and it's perhaps the strangest of my selections. Father Murphy, his own brand of psychedelia, has an approach to songwriting that's a little unusual. Things rarely settle into a groove. There's a lot of chopping and changing in structure. Sonically, there's something bordering on ritualistic about it, and the fragmented nature of the tracks gives the sense that you're listening to a single track that's all part of a cathartic cultural exorcism performed as a cycle of modern mystery plays. Titles like We Were Colonist, I Sob No More Rage, and Never Forget You Have a Choice hint at a transgressive attitude towards Italian culture and its relatively modern history by exposing a side that few may want to talk about. In that way, they remind me a little of Virgin Prunes, which is a name that should be familiar to anyone with an interest in early 80s post-punk and goth. Final Track in Their Graves is the closest it gets to a formalised structure. It's not an album I play too often, but every time I do, I can't help feeling that I ought to listen to it more frequently. Before I go any further, though, here's a glimpse at what's in the planning stages for this channel. Next, it's To the Other Side by Be My Delay. Marcella Riccardi is Be My Delay, and this was her debut from 2011. It combines psych folk and drum-based psychedelia. The Velvet Underground and We Will Fall from the first album by the Stooges come across as influences. Cobra Sun is a track which has shades of that Stooges track as well as Venus in Furs. However, Riccardi's reverb vocals have a warmth that make To the Other Side brighter in tone than the darkness of either the Velvet Underground or the Stooges. Drums and percussion are quite minimal, with some tracks having none at all. On Mirror, the rhythm has a touch of All Tomorrow's Parties about it. Tears and Visions is quite dreamy and trippy and moves closer to a blissed out spacey sound. The title track is my favourite on the album and mostly consists of a single repeated guitar line as well as sparse percussion and vocals which echo and swirl. Possibly the most successful album out of the 10 I've included for this video. Her other two albums on Boring Machines, Hazy Lights and Bloom Into Night, abandon the psychedelia for a greater emphasis on acoustic folk, where the lyrics show a more fragile side of Riccardi. My eighth choice is Divas by Divas, an album where dark ambience with flashes of industrial music is presented in 4 tracks totaling just under 31 minutes. On the face of it, that might come across as fairly unremarkable, but what gives this album a clear identity is the use of saxophone. On the vinyl version of the album, there are 3 tracks on side A and a single 15-minute track on side B. The opening track uses a skittering electronic rhythm over which slower brooding bass notes are added, and then the saxophone. The second track has slightly greater energy rhythmically, and the saxophone has a structured sequence of notes, making it the most conventional track of the 4. Track 3 is maybe the least impressive, washes of saxophone against an ascending mechanical hum. The final track in the main leaves the rhythm to a bass pulse or a distant higher frequency tone. The mood of the track gives it the feel of something like a soundtrack to walking around a long abandoned factory with the saxophone filtering in through the broken windows from somewhere far away. Although short, it's extremely atmospheric. Released in 2017, this was the first album by Divas, and they've released 2 others since. I've not heard those, but if they're anything like this one, listening to them would be time well spent. Next is Il Ciclo del Vuoto by Noinor. Now, I've no idea whether I've pronounced the artist's name correctly, but it'll have to do. In fact, I don't know much about them at all, but apparently they come from Valcamonica, which is not far from the Italian-Swiss border. Il Ciclo del Vuoto, which means the vacuum cycle, is from 2019. It's industrial, it can be abrasive in places, yet subtle in others. For someone such as myself who enjoys listening to late 70s, early 80s artists like Throbbing Gristle and SBK, it's a damn fine album. Where Noinor differs from those other artists is that 21st century technology gives them a precision and control that wouldn't have easily been possible for earlier bands. That's not to say the absence of chaos removes the heart from the music. It's merely a modern adaptation with just as much sense of purpose as anything that came before it. Rullo Trasportatore and the title track are examples of abrasiveness, whereas Nel Vuoto and Anormalia are among those where subtlety comes to the fore. I doubt that anyone will ever be humming any of the tracks to themselves in the shower, but if you like rhythm-focused music using unconventional sounds, Il Ciclo del Vuoto could be right up your street. Finally, it's Death Surf by Heroin in Tahiti. This is one of those albums where I'd played it a few times, thought that it's all right, then I played it again a while later, and it was like an epiphany. Heroin in Tahiti are a two-piece, Francesco De Figueiredo and Valerio Mattioli. Death Surf, released in 2012, was their debut. What you get is a mix of surf guitar with spaghetti western and psychedelic leanings, background drones, and electronic rhythms which often seem to be built from unusual sources. On X Giants on Dope, it's as if they sampled someone breathing with an aqualung and looped it into the rhythm. With the track Heroin in Tahiti, it's more like the sound of crickets at night, and it's these types of things, when added to the guitar and the invariably slow beat, that gives the album a distinct character. In places, the down-tuned guitar makes the notes seem guttural. The title track and Spaghetti Wasteland are other standouts, and in the end, the album evokes a feeling where I can imagine being on a cliff top on the outskirts of a Mediterranean village at sunset, relaxing with a few drinks and hearing the sound of them playing in some bar down below against the backdrop of waves gently breaking on the shoreline. How's that for a bit of a romantic descriptive? That's the tip of the iceberg, really. There are many other artists I could have picked, such as My, Adriano Zani, Satan is My Brother, Dream Weapon Ritual, and Adamenon, to name but a few. For the adventurous among you who like trying out something you've not heard before, I hope this video proves to be a useful pointer. As I mentioned at the start, I have these albums digitally, but I believe they're all released on physical formats too. However, they're not widely available in the UK, and finding them might be easier said than done. Discogs or Bandcamp might be your best bet. There is a playlist link in the video description which features a track from each album. That leaves you with no more to say other than, as ever, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.